It's time for the Phil Ferguson Show.
Welcome, everybody. This is Phil Ferguson, and you are, of course, listening to the cleverly titled The Phil Ferguson Show. It is probably, by the time you're listening to this, August of 2019. A little bit later in the show, we're going to have an interview with Ray Smock. He and I talk at length about the Mueller Report and Mr. Mueller's testimony in front of the House of Representatives a couple weeks back. I guess, a week or two back. We talk about that, and of course, Ray Smock is the former House historian for the actual House of Representatives in the United States, has a long history of studying history and politics, and written many books on the subject, and of course, has recently been a follower of Donald Trump for the purpose of pointing out all the awful and horrible things that he's done. And we're going to have a nice long discussion about the Mueller Report and what it does say, what it doesn't say, and I think you'll enjoy it. So, of course, that's coming a little later on. Also, in a few minutes, we will have the Investing Skeptically segment, which goes over a new super shitty fund. I think you're going to enjoy that as well. And before I get into that, I've got a couple of quick things that I'm going to throw out. One of them is in reference to really large U.S. growth stocks. And I've talked about this, and they keep doing well, but the longer they do great and the longer they do better than everything else in the stock market, the more concerned I become about people's assets or investments becoming concentrated. And one of those things that concerns me is that if a big chunk of your money is in a handful of stocks, if one or more of them turn against you, they start to lose money or they can't make as much money, it could have a really big effect on your portfolio, even if the market itself doesn't go down. And that's called specific stock risk. And I don't normally talk about specific stocks, but on a rare occasion I have, and I'm going to do one of those today, just real briefly. The stock that concerns me is Netflix. Now, if you have some Netflix in a mutual fund or an index fund, whatever, just make sure you don't have too much of it. Just like you shouldn't have too much of another handful of really large companies. But Netflix in particular is worrying me because the world is changing, and Netflix created a piece of this world by being able to stream content to you, and it wasn't always their content, and they did really well, and they found out a way to continually raise prices, and people keep paying it. They've been able to make some amazing content. And I don't think Netflix is going to go away, but I just see problems with them growing from where they are. And if they can't grow, that might deflate the valuation of the stock a little bit. And one of the reasons is that people that make content, people other than Netflix, and have their content on Netflix, look at that and they say, hey, maybe we can do that also. Maybe we can make our own website or app for your phone or for the Amazon Fire Stick or for Hulu or Roku, and we don't need to use Netflix to do that. We can make more money than our contracts with Netflix. And one of those companies that is coming off of contract, and not everything falls off at the same time, but a lot of stuff comes off soon, and a lot of it will come off in the next year or two and be available only on their newly launched system / platform / website / app, whatever. And that's Disney Studios. And Disney looks at this and says, why are we helping Netflix make money when we can pocket all that money? And if you think, well, okay, Netflix or Disney, that's cool, but just some kids' movies and stuff. You don't know how big Disney has become. As an example, they, of course, have Disney Studios, but they also have Marvel Studios. So all the Marvel movies are Disney movies. Lucasfilm, that's right, anything Star Wars is now Disney. They also own Fox Searchlight Pictures. They own 20th Century Fox and Walt Disney Animation Studios and Pixar Studios, which was spawned off by Disney or promoted by Disney, but then they bought it, and 20th Century Fox Animation. So they own a lot of things, and I think they're going to have a nice market, and they can pitch family-friendly and maybe not have some of the stuff that's on Netflix. I don't know what's really bad on Netflix, but they can market it to families. So I think Disney can be very successful. You also have, I hope this is right, CBS has been promoting their new platform, and of course the driving force for them has been Star Trek, and they have this new Star Trek series, and they have another one coming out, and so they want to drive people to the CBS platform, and at some point, if they can get that up and running, they will start pulling content or letting the contracts with Netflix lapse, and you'll have to go there. Of course, HBO has been phenomenally successful with Game of Thrones at getting people to subscribe there. So we have a future point where, yes, you pay still a ton of money to your internet provider, your cable provider, and they get the internet to your house, and they may throw in a bunch of TV channels for next to nothing or for free, and you're still going to pay them, but then you're going to have to pay for Netflix, you're going to have to pay for Disney, you're going to have to pay for CBS or HBO, or maybe you don't have to, but all those things could hurt Netflix. So that's just something that's popping in my head. We'll see what happens in the future, but I'm a little worried about that. So if you have 4 or 5 or 10% of Netflix stock in your account because you bought a little bit and it went up a ton, maybe think about reducing your position a little bit. So that's one thing. The other idea that kind of goes with this is I just got an email from Vanguard letting investors know that some of their funds might change to non-diversified funds. And so what that means is there is more concentration in a handful of stocks than what is allowed by the standards created by the Investment Company Act of 1940. And there's just, someone drew a line and said this fund is diversified and this fund is not diversified. So I'm going to read a little bit of the text sent in the update to Vanguard Mega Cap, which large cap growth is concerning enough for me, but mega cap, and I'm going to explain to you why here in a minute, but let me read part of what they sent here. The following is added under the heading Principal Risks, and this is being added to the prospectus of the Vanguard Mega Cap Growth Index Fund. By the way, a fund I do not use, but it's very similar to the Large Cap Growth Fund, which also will have things like this added to the prospectus. Quote, non-diversification risk. Due to recent index rebalancing and in order to closely track the composition of the fund's target index, more than 25% of the fund's total assets are invested in issues representing more than 5% of the fund's total assets. As a result, the fund is non-diversified under the Investment Company Act of 1940. Although it continues to hold more than 100 stocks across a number of sectors, the fund's performance may be hurt disproportionately by the poor performance of a relatively few stocks or even a single stock, and the fund's shares may experience significant fluctuations in value. So this doesn't necessarily mean don't own this fund, because I am still going to use the Large Cap Growth Fund, which is very similar to this Mega Cap Growth Fund. But don't get nutty. Don't get carried away. Don't look at it and say, wow, it's done so great that I should put more and more of my money there. in my slightly contrarian, slightly philosophically conservative investment style, where I have way more stocks than most people recommend. You just don't want to have too much in this one small basket. And I think I have pulled this up on Morningstar, this specific fund. The symbol is VMGAX, again, Vanguard Mega Cap Growth. You can find the top holdings, and the single biggest holding of this fund is Microsoft Corporation, almost 10% of the fund. Microsoft has done very well. It is very big. They make a ton of money, and as long as that keeps happening, everyone could be happy. But this fund has 10% of its money in that one stock. It has Apple at 8%, Amazon at 7.5%, Facebook at 7.5%, Alphabet at 6%, Visa, MasterCard, and then a few more companies. But it's very concentrated, and a big chunk of the money is in a handful of stocks, which is one of the reasons we own index funds, is to not have too much of this exposure. So if this is the only the only stock fund that you had, you would inadvertently have almost 10% in Microsoft, which violates my 5% maximum rule. So just be aware of what you own. If you have stock funds that are large cap or growth funds, or large cap growth funds, or aggressive funds, almost any stock fund that you don't know is something specifically different, you should look at it, and you should pull it up on Morningstar.com and go to the tab at Morningstar called Portfolio, and just look at what the top holdings are. If you have 4 or 5 different stock mutual funds, and then the top holdings in all of them are about the same, you may have way less diversification than you thought, and maybe less diversification than you should need. But this is something where I actually applaud Vanguard in a way. If it's a large cap growth fund, or if it's a mega cap growth fund, I want them to follow that index. I want them to stick true to it, and then I know exactly what I own, what my clients own, and I don't want Vanguard playing any games with saying, oh, we're going to hedge this index by putting 20% bonds in a stock fund. They don't do that. I don't want them to do that. We can do that. You can do that on your own, because you know exactly what you own. At Vanguard, we're going to go into the super shitty fund coming up, and then a long interview where Ray and I talk about the Mueller Report.
My father, the man responsible for my education, taught me that Islam, rightly understood, is a religion and philosophy of peace. In fact, he said that for any society to be peaceful and prosperous, it had to institute the rule of God, or Sharia. I came to disagree with my father. It was a gradual process that started when I entered and lived in societies such as the Netherlands and the United States that applied man-made constitutions and laws. Both countries are peaceful and prosperous. I now disagree even more with my father that Islam is a religion of peace. When I look at the amount of security that is deployed tonight here, the amount of security that is deployed for the Richmond Marathon. 6 months ago, the Boston Marathon was bombed by 2 brothers who invoked the founding documents and the founding father of Islam. I disagree with my father when I look at the wanton killing of the Westgate Mall in Nairobi by Somali men invoking Allah and Muhammad to justify their horrid act. Kenya is the most hospitable country to Somalis fleeing their own country, so it distresses me even more. I disagree with my father when I look at the reports this week of 30 men and women worshipping in Iraq who are killed by a suicide bomber invoking the very same God and the very same prophet that they invoke. I disagree with my father when he says that Islam is a religion of peace. When I look at the 120,000 dead in Syria, Syria is now a stage of a proxy war between Islam's two most important and most influential nations, the Sunni Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and the Shia Islamic Republic of Iran. I disagree with my father that Islam is a religion of peace when I read about the almost daily reports of the destruction of churches, the pillaging of Christian property, the rape of Christian women, the terrible exodus of Christians and other religious minorities from Muslim countries. All this is done by men who invoke the founding father and founding documents of Islam. I disagree with my dear beloved father when I read about the teenage girl in Pakistan who's shot point blank in the head by a man invoking Allah and Muhammad because she wanted education. In the name of Allah and Muhammad, women are forbidden to drive. They're forbidden to own their own reproductive rights. They're forbidden to do anything unless they have permission from a male guardian. I disagree with my father that Islam is a religion of peace when I read these founding documents and I study the history and the example of the Prophet Muhammad. In there, I find an insistence of war and intolerance towards infidels, the hypocrites, those who associate God with others, homosexuals, women, and so on.
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
I guess I shouldn't be surprised, but so many people have told me they like when I do the segment called Super Shitty Fund. And it's not something that I actually seek out. I don't look for these things. But I've got another one. Matter of fact, I've got two of them. I'm only going to do one today, and the other one maybe in a few weeks or a few months, depending on if people still like this little segment. But this one was one of those things that was sent to me. I'm going to be a little coy now who sent it to me because we ended up talking, had a great conversation. But in an average day, I get one or two emails and probably a phone call of somebody from our random company that has mutual funds, investments, annuities, all kinds of stuff. And it has grown, and particularly recently it's grown. And I don't know if I've hit some magical metric that I'm big enough to matter to these people, so I get more contacts, but it's really fucking annoying. And most of it I just ignore, I delete it, I mark it as spam, and I get on with my life. But a few days ago, I happened to get like 5 or 6 of these before like 10 o'clock in the morning. And I'm like, is it a full moon? What the fuck? And so I started giving pithy responses to these emails, which probably is a really bad idea if I don't want more of them. And one of them had a phrase, something like, given the long-term bull market and the inverted yield curve, isn't this a good time to look at futures and future hedging? Well, what is the phrase they use? Managed futures. So one of my first thoughts was, despite your non sequitur, no, or I'm philosophically opposed to your strategy. And I went through all these combinations of the email and I just decided to reply back, no, or something like, thanks for your email, no. And I went on and did that to several other emails. Now, almost always when I do that, I get no response because they figure out I'm not interested. And in this case, the person said, thank you for your response. Why? And I thought it was such a pithy retort to my very terse email that this was a person who might be interesting to talk to. So I picked up the phone and I called him. Picked up the phone. Like there's an actual, well, I guess there is an actual phone, my cell phone, but I had my little earpiece in. I called the number on the bottom of the email and talked to them, and they explained why their fund is so awesome and it's uncorrelated to the market, and it's a great way to make returns, and with growing fears of a recession, which I don't agree with. Just so you know, I don't predict these things. So you should have a good, solid strategy all the time. Whether the market's going up or down, whether it has gone up or it has gone down. You just have a good system, and you don't need to fuck around with this shit. And, you know, they were interesting to talk to, a very nice person, tried to convince me of why these things were good. And I said, okay, just for a laugh, send me some information. And so they sent me some information, and they sent me documents to read. One of them cracked me up because it was called, what is this called? One pager on why you should consider managed futures. And it is a 4-page document. Now, clearly that doesn't matter. It doesn't make it good or bad, but why call it a 1-pager when it's 4? I guess you're appealing to the simplicity of the person you're expecting to read it. So when I'm looking at this document, the first thing I notice on page 1 is that the comparison of different investment strategies all happen to start at the very beginning of the year 2000 or at the very end of 99, depending on how you want to look at it. And I've said this in the show before. If someone is telling you how awful the stock market is doing, and they start from the year 2000, they are probably, well, let me see, optimistically, they're being disingenuous. Pessimistically, they're being deceitful. Because if you look at the data, and let's see, I'm going over here now to Wikipedia S&P 500, because you can go look here yourself. And again, this is one of the parts of investing skeptically that I often, not always, but often give you a place where you can go look at the data yourself. Go look at it. S&P 500 on the Wikipedia page. It's really easy. It's beautiful. I mean, there's a lot of math and detail, but there's this cool chart that shows you how the S&P has done every year. And it shows you the point-to-point change, which often annuities use, which means you don't get any of the dividend. And then there's the total return, including dividends, which I think is the only thing that really matters, because that's what you get if you invest in the S&P 500. And then it has 5-year return average, 10-year return average, 15-year return average, 20-year return average. And if you look at the 20-year return average, which now is about the beginning of 2000, starting from the beginning of 2000 till now, the average return is only 5.62%. Because that was right after the crazy .com shit. And the market went down a lot. And it went down over a year and a half, close to 2 years. I mean, actually, I have the data in front of me. It was down in 2000, 2001, and 2002 when you look at the year, full calendar year basis, -9, -12, and -22. So that's 34, 40, probably close to 50%, depending on exactly when you look at it. It was a big fucking deal. So if you start right before then, it's not fucking coincidence that they picked the start at the beginning of the year 2000, because it has down 50%. So if you have any kind of portfolio strategy that is less than 100% stocks, you're going to look good for a very long time when the stocks start by losing 50%. So it's at best disingenuous. And so they had this chart that shows the difference between 100% stock, 60 stock versus 40 bond, and an equally weighted stock, bond, and what did they call us? Managed futures. And I was like, okay, so it's a cool looking chart. I love charts. But as soon as it starts from 2000, I have to believe, I just can't convince myself that all these people are fucking randomly picking that year. They pick it for a reason. It makes what they're trying to sell you look palatable. And I don't like that. Then the next chart they have talks about taking money out and how you can do in the long run. And in this case, they, for whatever reason, they start in the calendar year 1965. And I thought, I wonder why they picked 1965. And the S&P data on Wikipedia page starts in 1970, so I don't have that. But it just turns out the last couple years of the 60s into the first couple years of the 70s was not a good time for the Dow Jones. Because, again, I don't have the S&P data, so I pulled up the Dow Jones historical data, and the market sucked pretty hard for several years. And so if you start, again, with the peak, and it's not that it's bad data, it's not that it's wrong, but you're being deceptive. You're picking from a time that is really a bad point to start from. And, of course, they show a person that has 100% stocks going broke sooner than someone that has stocks and bonds. Well, no shit, Sherlock, because you lost less money when a stock market went down because you had bonds. Something we talk about, we call it the cushion here, but you get the idea. The other thing that was interesting is that they modeled $1 million portfolio, and then they take out $6,000 a month, $6,060 a month. I thought that was a really weird choice. The footnote below says they take out 6% withdrawal rate. Well, $6,000 a month times 12 months is around $72,000 out of $1 million. It's 7.2%, but the footnote says 6. I'm very concerned about that. I think that in this case, whoever put the footnote there, whoever calculated taking out $6,000 a month, either doesn't realize there's 12 months in a year instead of 10, which is ludicrous, is grotesquely incompetent in doing calculations, or again, intentionally deceitful. So I have problems with that. I would not use anything from a company that I thought the best explanation for what they're sending me is incompetence. I make mistakes. I get it. I could have done it, but just this stacked with everything else, that if the way you have to convince me that what you have to sell is through deceit, I don't know. That really, really bothers me. So the name of this company, this mutual fund company, is called Longboard, like surfing dudes, like a surfboard, longboard. Hey, that's cool. Longboard Managed Future Strategies 1 is the one I'm ripping apart today. They have another fund that I'm not even going to go into detail on. But this one, the symbol for it, the 5 letters that you could research this, WAVIX. And again, I tell you, because don't take my word for it. Go look it up. Just type in WAVIX in your search bar. If that doesn't get you a good result, type in WAVIX and the word Morningstar. You can go to their website, and one presumes unbiased information on how phenomenally awful this fund is. The other thing is that in the data they sent me, I've got to find the right page here. Yes, here it is. It's funny. This document is called Fund Facts, but I keep thinking it says Fun Facts. That's kind of funny for me. Anyway, let's see. It has a front-end sales load of 5.75%, which I'm assuming if I were to recommend that you buy it, that I would get some chunk of that. I actually didn't get into the details of that. But the average return, taking into account the load, which you must take into account because that money disappears, the average return for this fund since inception in 2012 is minus 0.78%, or almost minus 1% per year for the last 7 years. Now, in the last 7 years, the U.S. stock market is basically doubled, gone up 100% over a 7-year time period. This fund, which I'll grant does not promise they're going to beat the market, which is kind of cool, but the intention is you're going to get the vast majority of the upside, and because of their clever strategy in this, it's not going to go down when the market goes down. And one of their big sales pitches is that it's uncorrelated to other investments. Well, cash is fucking uncorrelated to other investments because when the stock market goes up, cash stays at zero or stays where it was. When the stock market goes down, cash stays where it was. So it's pretty darn uncorrelated. So if your goal is to reduce correlation, you can get a cash investment, you can get bonds, you can get U.S. Treasuries, you can get international bonds. There's things that you can do. And I try to pick and choose the things that make sense. Losing money for the purpose of reducing my overall volatility is not one of my goals. So, like I said, this fund since 2012 has lost about 1% per year while they are bragging about how clever they are. And one of the reasons they've lost money, of course, the 5.75% load that you pay up front, is that the expense ratio is 2.88% per year. They also have an alternate version that's 3.12% per year. And so when you are paying out 3% a year, it's really hard for you to make a lot of money. Because if it's a fund that competes with the stock market that should make 5 or 10% and you're losing 3% right off the bat. So this fund truly is a super shitty fund. But I will tell you that the person that I talked to, we actually just had a conversation. I waited to record this segment until I was able to rip him a new one. Really cool. This person, they get it. They understand that they have a job and they're doing their job. I don't know that I would be able to maintain that job, but I'm not in their shoes. Maybe it's what they need to do right now to pay their bills until they can find something else. But they seemed fantastic. We had actually a great conversation because after I started explaining my thoughts on this, they couldn't do anything but agree. Also, they were very fascinated to find out there's an advisor that appeals to the secular community. So we had some good fun talking about that. So I'm not mentioning their name because that would be kind of a dick move because he or she is not here to defend themselves. But Longboard Mutual Fund Company, I'm going to mention their name. And I told you the symbol VMGAX. And again, this fits into the category of something I've talked about before, tactical funds. And again, this person that I talked to said, that's interesting because the other fund we have is a tactical fund. And they sent me a link to look at that. And I just haven't done it yet for this purpose of the show. And I'm sure it's going to be just as bad as this. But these are the kinds of things that are out there and being sold. And, you know, the employees part of the system. But the people that run this, the people that are on top of this, that manage this, do they still think this is a good idea? I mean, when they first came up with the ideas, they probably ran some backtested data. And we've talked about backtested data. But in short, backtested data is I come up with a scheme or an idea or a way of buying and selling something. And then I look at whatever data I can get my hands on for the last 1, 5, or 10 years. And I run my model backward through time with perfect hindsight vision of what actually did happen. And I see how my model would have responded going back in time. And if my model responds shittily and provides awful returns, I change my model and I run the data again. And I change my model and I run the data again. And I change my model and I run the data again. And I might do this 5 times. I might do this 150 times. And finally, I get a good result. And so now I package that all up and I sell it to you because I've convinced myself that over the last decade or the last 20 years, whatever, this works. And so I want to help you make money. And it works so well that I'm going to charge you 3%. But once you've run it in real time, and in this case, for 7 years, you by now know it's a piece of shit. And the fact that you ran it backwards through data, that was cool. But when you actually put it in practice, it didn't work. When do you stop? When do you decide, hey, this thing that's paying all of my bills, let's see, how big is this thing now? They have convinced investors to contribute, well, I guess it could be higher than this. The assets that it has under management as of 3/31 of 19 is $184 million. Now, when I say that's not all of the investments, because over the last couple of years, it's gone down in value. So, and of course, there may have been people that lost money and left, and maybe some people made some money and left. But when you have $200 million to manage and you've told somebody that this works and they're willing to pay you 3% a year, do you contact them and go, hey, that thing we told you to buy 5 years ago actually sucks ass. We feel really bad about it. So we're just going to shut down and give you your money back? No, they don't. I mean, 3% on 200 million. You can do the math, right? 3%. That's 3 million times 2 is $6 million. $6 million a year they're pulling out of this fund. I mean, some of that is actual expenses and running the business, but somebody's getting rich. Why stop doing that? I guess I can understand the temptation. And then, of course, this segment's way longer than I expected. But if you're getting $500,000 or $1 million a year as one of the managers and the owners, you're not really motivated to look at this and go, damn, this sucks. Maybe you're motivated to come up with a new fund and do like most historic mutual fund companies. When you have multiple funds, you take some of the shitty ones and you roll them over into the less shitty ones so that you can show you have this big stable of high quality, well-performing funds. But anyway, that's the super shitty fund for today. And ironically, I have another one. I mentioned that earlier. I'll probably do that in a few weeks, but that's it for today. The Phil Ferguson Show is for educational purposes only. Nothing said on the show should be interpreted as personalized investment advice. Your investments should be based on your situation, and you should consult with your financial advisor before taking any action. The show may contain ads. These ads are placed into the show by the hosting company after I finish recording and editing. I have little control over the content of the ads, and you should not assume that I support their products or claims. If you choose to support the show via the new Patreon page, that support does not create an advisor-client relationship. With me today, I have Ray Smock, who I guess is now a friend of the show because you've been on a couple times. How are you, Ray? How are you doing today?
I'm doing great, Phil.
Now, you previously had some job in the government. For the listeners who have not heard you before, can you give us a recap of that, please?
Well, sure. I was the first official historian of the U.S. House of Representatives back in the 1980s and 1990s, and I was hired to plan for the 200th anniversary of the Congress and the U.S. Constitution, and to work with federal commissions and all three branches of government to make that happen. It's a great job, and since then, since 95, after Newt Gingrich became Speaker and let me go, I continued to study Congress, to work on the National Constitution Center in Philadelphia, on their design and on the exhibits there, and then to run a center that studies Congress at a little college in West Virginia, about 70 miles from D.C. That's where I'm at now.
Excellent. And just as a fun aside, if I understand this correctly, you modeled for one of the founding fathers, did you not?
Yes, I did the research on all the statues that's in Steiner's Hall in Philadelphia, and if your listeners haven't been there, I think they'd love to see that whole establishment for the Constitution, the first museum dedicated to the Constitution. But in the course of doing the research, there's a suit of Benjamin Franklin's clothes in the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C., and I measured his trousers, and his waist was the same size as mine. And so was the coat and everything else. So I ended up being the model for the Ben Franklin statue, which was a lot of fun. And perhaps in my obituary, they won't remember any of the books that I wrote or anything else I did, but they'll say he was the model for a Ben Franklin statue.
That's good fun. So the suit fit, and they used you.
It was great fun.
Excellent. Now, and you threw out there already that you've written a couple of books. So tell us about your books.
Well, I'm originally my whole career was in African American history. So I worked for on the 14-volume documentary papers of Booker T. Washington, and then published a biography of him in 2009, and subsequently have written on the history of photography and on a lot of books on Congress. We did a 2-volume study a few years ago called Congress Investigates, a critical and documentary history that covers most of the major congressional investigations, going all the way back to the first one in 1793 and bringing it up when we finished our series. It was the Hurricane Katrina hearings that were going on in Congress. So a wide variety of things, most of them research tools, the biographical directory of the United States Congress, and landmark documents on the Congress, things like that. But a steady stream. And then more recently, now that I'm retired and have somewhat shucked off my mantle of bipartisan and nonpartisan professionalism, I'm now writing books about critical books about Donald Trump. I published 2 of those. One called Trump Tsunami, and the other one more recently, American Demagogue. So I continue to write and enjoy life here, just outside of the Beltway.
Yeah, and of course, it's no accident that I have on not only a well-known and well-respected historian, but specifically a congressional historian and an expert on congressional inquiries and testimonies, because we just had one, right?
Well, we had one, and everybody's still trying to figure out when we're going to do the real investigation, which could be an impeachment inquiry.
Right.
But certainly there's since the 2018 election, the House now has the power to begin to investigate and check in a serious way the excesses of our president. They couldn't do that, or they wouldn't do that when Republicans controlled both chambers of the House and Senate.
Now, of course, recently there was the hearings where he was interviewed, Mr. Mueller, Robert Mueller, and of course, you read the full Mueller report recently, and even more recently, I like to say I paid someone to read it to me. I had the audiobook, which was a
great
weird experience, because they would read what was on the pages, and then it would just say redacted. And I got all the information, all the different types of redactions, but I didn't get to see if it was a word or a sentence or 4 pages. So I kind of missed out on that experience. What are your thoughts on the Mueller report before we even get into his testimony?
The Mueller report is it's confused a lot of people, and that's unfortunate, because what it did was to lay out a very strong case, not only of the Russian involvement and tampering with our election system, which is ongoing, according to Robert Mueller, and by all indications of our intelligence community. So that's part one, and that alone is a devastating and should be an alarming wake-up call for the American people. Here's the thing, Phil. This is a new kind of warfare, and the American public is not ready for it. If they imagine the trade towers when they went down, that was a terrorist attack on the United States, killed more than 3,000 people, destroyed the city, and people were paying for it forever. And there's still the victims are gone, of course, but then the first responders are still suffering. So that was a huge, major disaster. Everybody saw it that way. And the whole nation immediately went into high gear. And eventually we ended up getting in a war, I think, with the wrong people. But that launched a major war, and we're still feeling the reverberations from that. So, but that did not destroy, as bad as that was, it did not destroy the United States of America. It did not destroy our Constitution. In some ways, it made us stronger. But the cyber attacks go to the heart of destroying the government from within by subverting the democratic process itself. If that happens, we lose a new kind of warfare, and we lose the rule of law in the country, and no telling where that will lead. It could lead to all kinds of anarchy, and I don't know if we'll ever get our bearings again if we go off that way. And we don't understand that is happening to us right now. And that it's not just our election system. I mean, this cyber war, we already know. We engage in it, other countries engage in it. You can disrupt power grid systems. You can go into a hospital and mess up their records. There's so many ways that you can disrupt the society, and we're not doing anything about it.
Yeah, and of course, there's, on top of that, the social media, which is so new. I mean, just to all of us to use it, it has not kept pace with security protocols, and it generally just doesn't know how to handle the flow of information and what could be seen as brainwashing or stuff like that. It just doesn't get it, and it's out there.
You go on these social media, and the people are starting to get aware that there could be phony stuff out there, and that the Russians could be trolling. But now, if they get mad at their friends, they say, "Oh, you must be trolling for some foreign government." We use it as another insult in social media, and we don't take it seriously. We don't understand what it's actually doing to how we get information. We get most of our information now electronically, and both our news and basic information. We go online for every possible thing, and we have no idea what kind of information we're getting, how accurate it is, and we also don't know who's looking at what we're looking at. Yeah, Facebook and all these other companies are looking at it because they monitor and measure everything we buy and everything we do so that they can market us better.
It's definitely something like, for example, blogs years ago, and it's still more today, but a blog that had a moderate opinion and a well-thought-out rational discussion didn't draw the eyeballs of and or love and or hate, but ones that took extreme positions garnered more traffic, garnered more ad revenue, and no one seemed to care what was being said or who was saying it as long as the eyeballs showed up and as long as the clicks came. And I think that Russia and potentially other countries now, since they've seen the model created by Russia, it doesn't matter because not only do they get possibly ad revenue, but they can cause these disruptions by promoting and activities. They would set up events and protests and then find a hapless American who would agree to be the organizer, and they would fund it. And this person didn't even know that they were part of the Russian ploy to put on an event.
This is one of the big things that's going on throughout the world. That in terms of how we are conducting espionage, how we are attacking other countries, we are distorting reality, and that's very easy to do, and it has been since radio, but more specifically since television and now social media and virtual reality. I'm sitting here in my den, and I've got a recent copy of Time magazine in front of me, the one that was about the 50th anniversary of us landing on the moon, and it's got a kind of a dual cover. It's got some people looking like they're all commercial people racing to get to the moon. All these private companies. But when you open that flap and you read it, it says, "History comes alive. To mark the 50th anniversary of the Apollo 11 moon landing, Time has partnered with the John Knoll and Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum to create a groundbreaking augmented reality experience of this historic event. And this is going to be available to you through a new Time magazine immersive app for your Android and Apple systems. And so now we're going to be able to get augmented news. You can also put it on these visual things, these goggles you wear, and you can get an augmented experience of what it was like to land on the moon. Well, that's not what happened. That's not what we know. And that experience is going to be augmented reality, and that's how we're going to be doing our campaigns. We're doing it now, and we're going to be doing our campaigns that way. And by the way, when you open up the magazine to the full page, there's a big flag-waving people in the control room at NASA. 50 years ago, something extraordinary happened, and it looks like a real photograph of the actual event. But then you realize it's a Jimmy Dean sausage ad. 50 years ago, Jimmy Dean sausage landed on our plates. And there's a guy in the control room eating Jimmy Dean sausage with a sausage package sitting there in the control room down at NASA. Now, if that's what's coming out of Time magazine, that kind of augmented reality, that kind of mixing of advertising and phony reality, just to sell a package of sausage, well, you better believe that in politics, big money is going into big ways to do this to us.
Yeah, because I had hope for a while that, because one of the things I like to say is the nice thing about the internet is you can find any information. The bad thing about the internet is you can find any information, and you can find someone who agrees with you no matter how far off the deep end you are. And of course, now we can be manipulated. And one of the things the Mueller report was talking about was what Russia has done, what it's going to do, and what it's continuing to do. And the other thing that it talked about, at least in reference to something I want to talk about, is there's a certain person who we inconveniently or whatever shorthand call the President of the United States, who may have had some role in some of this or played along or been a patsy. I don't think he has the mental aptitude to plan something like this. But when people started to ask questions, he engaged in what I will call a very aggressive and thorough cover-up. What do you think about that statement?
Well, that did in fact happen, and of course we've seen how this report is. It's been out about a little over 100 days now, and Congress has not completely taken it up. They're just now beginning to hold these hearings. There's no question that the first volume, while it did not say that Trump specifically and legally and technically engaged in a conspiracy with the Russians, there was no question that Russians were falling all over the place in that campaign. They were coming out of the woodwork, and the first thing that you're told when you're running for a high office like that, if a foreign power comes to you with any kind of an offer or any promise of anything, you're immediately supposed to report it to the FBI. Well, Trump probably didn't know that, but he had people around him that knew that, and people who were serious players in government before, and none of them did it, and some of them are now in jail for lying about their connections with Russia. So to say that there weren't Russians all over Trump's campaign in one way or another is to deny the reality of what we saw with our own eyes and what the Mueller report does show in Volume 1. Now, Trump picked up on this collusion word, which is not even a technical legal term. Conspiracy is what you would be charged with, but he kept saying no collusion, no collusion. He couldn't prove collusion, and therefore he was exonerated. The president has the largest megaphone on the planet, and he has been going around and getting his people to go around and getting the entire Republican Party to go around and say no collusion 3 times in a row. No collusion, no collusion, no collusion. It's like when you're running for office, you have to say, I'm going to get you jobs, but you can't just say that. You have to say jobs, jobs, jobs. So we've heard the no collusion word until we're blue in the face. And then we get a new attorney general by the name of William Barr, and he, without even reading the report, gets it in confidentially, and 3 days later he says the president is exonerated, basically.
Now, it's
and
funny.
He wasn't.
You said 3 days later. I would say more like on the third day, which happened to have one evening, one day, and then a few hours of the next day. Not even a full 20 or not even a full 48-hour time period. Obviously, unless you had an advanced copy, there was no way you could read the 400 plus documents or 400 plays documents and fully understand it in that kind of time frame.
No, you couldn't. I spent a lot of time reading it. It took me about 12 days, not reading it constantly, but it's pretty dense stuff in a lot of ways. It's not designed for public consumption. When Bill Clinton, in the impeachment of Bill Clinton, the Starr report, they searched all over Bill Clinton, couldn't find any major crime or anything like that, but they did find, and they nailed him to the wall because he did lie about a sexual affair. He committed perjury, and that was an impeachable offense. And so for lying about a private sexual affair with a consenting adult, even though she was an intern at the White House or an employee of the White House, the whole thing was a mess. But think of it in perspective, that was enough to have the Starr report, and the Starr report was very graphic. I mean, so graphic that when I was studying and teaching them about the Starr report, I always put a slide up that showed the actual sexual events, and I go through it very quickly with my class, and almost every time, it was amazing. The class would say, "Professor Smock, would you back up to that last page?" And that's where you got all about the details of his affair, down to specific details of the sexual encounter. That was put in the Starr report. It became an instant bestseller all over the country. There's nothing like that in the Mueller report. It is got explosive stuff on every page, but it's not the kind of thing that grabs the public. And the public doesn't know what obstruction of justice is. Every prosecutor in America does. But there's the cases in Volume 2 of obstruction of justice are so startling. And we saw most of these in plain sight. The first one was the firing of Comey, James Comey, the FBI director. That was in plain sight. And what he did, and the reason he said he was doing it, because of this witch hunt investigation, and he wanted to stop it. That is obstruction, but there's much more serious obstruction, mainly in the Mueller report, where the president seeks to get the White House attorney McGahn to fire the attorney general, and one thing leads to another, and then Trump tries to cover that up by saying, "I want you to put a letter in the file that says I didn't ask you to do what I just asked you to do." That's obstruction. That's against the law. That's cover-up.
Yeah. And
so it's all there, but it doesn't come out. It hasn't come out right, and no one in the country is reading it, and the president is using his megaphone. Well, I was very disappointed, that, for example, in the way Mueller was treated on television. And he didn't serve himself well because he's not a television personality.
Yeah.
Everything we were hanging on. I sat here at my desk, Bill, with the Mueller report, and I was watching live streaming off of C-SPAN, and one of those people would say, "And you said on page 37 of Volume 2, and I had my copy right here in front of me, with no pressure, no big room, no 15,000 people, the lights shining on me and everything like that, and everybody taking my photograph. I couldn't keep up turning the pages." And Mueller was trying to do that, and he looked terrible doing it.
Yeah.
So visually, on television, he comes across as a doddering old fool, mainly because he said, "I'm not going to go beyond my report." And when they quoted his report, he wanted to double-check himself. But, boy, that looked terrible on television. But, again, it's an image, not the reality of what that report says.
Yeah, I found the report to be written in such a way. I mean, it's a professional legal document written for professional legal people. And, of course, I am not an attorney. I've never practiced law. I know enough about it to be dangerous, I guess. And I've read many, many, many long contracts and can sit and have the attention span to understand that, sometimes you have to read a whole paragraph to understand what is being said. And then, of course, you throw in the middle of that redacted, all these different things just disappearing. But despite all those things, it seemed really clear to me that not only was he laying out the possible situations that could be considered obstruction of justice, he specifically said, here's what makes obstruction of justice, here's what happened in this case, here's the law that you would refer to, here's the citations, here's what this person said, what this person said, and you wrap it all up and you put a little bow on it, and then you say, oh, but I'm not authorized to make that. I'm just saying. But in a very...
Well, that was... He followed... Mueller followed strictly the guidelines of the Department of Justice, which says... And I'm not sure that this should stand. I think when all this mess is settled and we look at it in a different light, and not necessarily as it affects just the current president, but we need to look at when we say no one is above the law, well, there ought to be ways in which the president, when a president breaks law, can be brought to justice. Now, the only way that we have to do that now is through impeachment, which is not... People don't understand this. Impeachment just removes you from office. It does not penalize you for anything that you did. The penalty, of course, is losing the power of the presidency. But that's it. You're just taken out of office. And then we haven't used that yet because the limitations on the impeachment, while it's a tremendously powerful tool in the Constitution, it depends on the government being sensible, both parties being sensible when they go into this impeachment process. What you have is a enabling party. The Republican Party has enabled the president from day one, and they're still doing it despite other investigations that are now going on. And probably the worst thing that came out of the Mueller hearing was that President Trump was watching it, and when he saw a obscure Republican in Texas by the name of Ratcliffe, who went after Mueller tooth and nail in a very demagogic manner, and basically said, "Well, are you the head of the Department of Exoneration? There is no Department of Exoneration." In other words, he sets up a straw man. He creates this Department of Exoneration, and then says, Mueller, there is no Department of Exoneration, proving his point, and that Mueller can't exonerate. And why couldn't he exonerate? He wasn't supposed to exonerate. There is no Department of Exoneration. It went into absurdity. Trump watched that 5-minute performance, and what did he do just yesterday? He named that guy to be our next intelligence chief, the head of all of our intelligence national services, in replacing Dan Coates, who Trump has wanted to get rid of for a long time. So he goes, Trump watches on television. He sees the guy that defends him in a very demagogic manner and who puts down Trump's nemesis, Robert Mueller. And he says, that's the guy I want to head our intelligence forces, just at a time when our intelligence forces are telling us we're not doing enough to stop the Russians. And that was probably the worst thing that happened.
Yeah, I was surprised how much I liked the title that CNN put on this story. I actually just shared this earlier today, and called him a partisan sycophant. And it's not every day I can see the word sycophant in a headline, let alone it being correct. Obviously, this guy thinks the sun rises and sets with Donald Trump and will do anything for him. And like you said, he's nominated, I guess, for the official position. And of course, if Congress doesn't approve him, he'll just be acting chief.
I'm not sure how that is going to play out. Yeah, I don't know if he's been tapped to be acting. It's not clear to me yet from the news. It's always breaking so fast. But again, the idea that some obscure congressman who is a sycophant, Trump looks for people like that. That's one of the ways he shrunk the government. People at the level of national intelligence the Director of National Intelligence and coordinator for all the other intelligence gathering agencies, that person should be able to go into the room with the president and speak truth to power. There's got to be people in this government who will say, Mr. President, you got to listen. We're in deep doo-doo here, and this is the reason why, and this is what we have to do to get out of it. But Trump cannot stand people like that. He's got to be the smartest person in the room. And so that's what this way he shrinks government. He finds people who think just like he does and who will do his bidding and will be sycophants to him. And then he surrounds himself with those, and it's like a black hole. He's sucking all the good forces out of the functioning of government and putting him right down his own pit. This example for a job as so crucial as Director of National Intelligence is, Vladimir Putin must be just doing a dance in Moscow Square right now.
So what can my average listener do? What should they do? Should they read the report? Should they go protest? What do we do?
I think it helps to try to read the report, but again, you can't expect every citizen to sit down and read a 400-page technical book. The newspapers and the media, various media, have been trying to get this out. Congress tried to do that. They tried to say, okay, the public will watch this television, and then it turned out to be a flop because Bob Mueller wasn't going to talk about anything except what was in his report, and the way they presented it to him made it almost impossible for him to perform well. So that was a mistake. My feeling is that the public does need to see more evidence in how this plays out, and the best way people, what we saw in Watergate was a whole stream of people coming before committees in public. They would testify in public, and the public eventually got to the point where they say, I can see that guy's a crook, or this person's telling the truth. But you don't we don't have that tableau spread before us like we did in the Watergate. But even Watergate took 2 years, and it was President Nixon was reelected right in the middle of that whole investigation. So it's not easy.
Yeah.
And it's not easy for Congress to simply say we're going to impeach the man when they're not going to be able to get 2/3 of a vote in the Senate.
Well, and you also have a very large media network that probably took sound bites from the Mueller report where you simply had Republicans spinning these conspiracy theories, and Mueller, of course, just had to sit there and listen to them. And I saw once or twice he tried to say, well, what you're saying is not true, and the person would come back and go, these are my 5 minutes, because he was right. The witness. So the interviewer, the questioner, can say anything and have it go in the record, no matter how crazy it is, and then allow Mueller no time to respond, or like you said, quote him a paragraph on a certain page, and they want to be in a hurry. So I still think it had value, but it didn't present well. It could have presented better, maybe, but I don't know. I just I have to resist getting down about all this and hope that at some point we turn a corner. And I'm thinking the continuing or starting the impeachment process and getting people to testify and interview, hopefully, provides us enough information to the average voter that we can shift a few percentage points so he doesn't get reelected.
That's probably our best bet. I have been reluctant to say that we should go for impeachment, but I have been moved in my position of late to say that we should start an impeachment inquiry. An impeachment inquiry gives the Congress a more urgency with subpoenas, and the courts are more likely to support and quickly respond to any challenge. Anybody who says, I'm not appearing before Congress during this impeachment, the courts have demonstrated that they're not inclined to do that. This is serious business, has to play out. The courts are not just saying whether the president's guilty or not guilty. They're saying that Congress has the right to investigate, and there's been ample cases for that, precedent for that in the past. So, beginning an impeachment inquiry would be able to we would be able to marshal some of these people that we need to see and hear in public. Hope Hicks, Don McGahn, some of these key people who have been so intimately involved in almost everything in the Trump administration, and have whether they wanted to or not, they've had to be part of the cover-up.
Yeah.
And McGahn finally figured out ways that he could try to distance himself, but they're all playing these very complicated games of trying to distance themselves and at the same time carry out their functions. It would take an inquiry to get to the bottom of that, and maybe that inquiry would not even complete its work before the next election. But it needs to start, and there's no reason why they shouldn't be starting an impeachment inquiry in the House Judiciary Committee. That's where it has to start. The House could easily impeach the president, because all it takes in the House is a simple majority. The House has the votes to impeach the president. So impeachment is a two-part process. So he can get impeached. That's basically an indictment in the House. He can be indicted under all the stuff that's in the Mueller Report is ample. But then he's tried in the Senate. You go over to the Senate, and there's House managers, and they go over to the Senate. Trump will never appear in any of this. It will all be handled by his lawyers. But there will be witnesses, and it will be argued in the Senate. And the Senate acts as a jury, and all 100 senators get to vote. The Chief Justice of the United States presides, but he's just a presiding officer. He makes no decision. The senators vote, and they need a two-thirds majority to convict and remove the president from office. So impeachment's a two-step process. We could do the first part of the process, but that could backfire politically, and I think that's Nancy Pelosi's calculus right now, that impeaching the president and then not bringing it to conclusion will just be seen as a political ploy to embarrass the president. Well, that's what they were doing with Clinton.
Yeah.
The Republicans were trying to embarrass him. He stayed in office. He had a 60% approval rating.
Yeah, it's a very weird thing, because also part of me feels that if they know all these things and see all these things that are bad and illegal, if they don't try, is that saying it's kind of okay? I mean, it's not clearly saying it's okay. It's saying it's politically expensive, but damn, I mean, can't this be simpler? How do we get simple?
The last time I was on with you, Phil, I mentioned the Presidential Records Act, and I said I thought that that's another one of the things that the president has violated, because he's not keeping proper records of his meetings with Vladimir Putin. He's not keeping internal records. In fact, there's evidence in the Mueller report that he has tried to doctor the records that do get kept. So he's conscious that he needs to have a way to cover himself, but his idea is to not create records, and he learned that from his whole career. If you don't have a record, they can't get you.
Yeah,
and he doesn't want his taxes public, because if they don't know what's in them, all they can do is speculate. They can't come after you. So he's not creating some records, and other records he's falsifying. Now, at the time that we talked before, no one was really talking about that. Since then, a lot of people are. I'm not saying that I started it by any means. Anybody that follows the National Archives material like I do, and I served for many years on a federal commission at the National Archives. I'm not in that capacity now, but I know about the Federal Records Act, and I know about the presidential records. And I did write a book on presidential records and what's in the presidential libraries. But that is another one of those things that Mueller does not take up. It's a whole area of violations of the law. The emoluments clause, Mueller did not take up the emoluments clause, and there's ample evidence that he's continuing to make plenty of money, some of it from foreign powers, while he's president. And so he never put any of his money in blind trust or anything like that. He says his sons are running the business and he's not doing it, but his sons talk to him every day.
Yeah, I never.
You tell me who's running the business.
Yeah, I never bought that for a second. Well, it's been a good 40 minutes. I didn't know that we would go this long. Is there anything you want to throw in or wrap up with before we go back to work and do something productive?
Well, there's all around the country, people are starting to have little book clubs that are reading the Mueller Report. I think that's a nice touch. Some people are waking up to the fact that they have to pay attention. I just hope that Congress can have the will to do what's necessary to help save this country.
I agree, and I thank you, Ray, so much for your time, and I appreciate you coming to visit yet again on the Phil Ferguson Show.
Anytime you want me on, Phil, I'm always here, ready to talk.
The Pope, discussing the existence of God with an out-and-out atheist, starts off very correctly, discussion, and as the hours go by, it gets more and more heated, and eventually the Pope turns to the man and he said, "The mom! Get the mom! And you, come here. You are like a man who is totally blindfolded in a dark room looking for a black cat that is not there." The fellow said, "With all respect, Your Holiness, I think there's great similarity between us both." He said, "What do you mean, similarity?" He said, "Well, as far as I am concerned, you are like a man who is blindfolded in a totally dark room looking for a black cat that isn't there. The only difference is that you found it."
You're listening to The Phil Ferguson Show.
Thank you so much for listening to the show. I am delighted that you are here and enjoy the show. You can show a little love by going and giving a review on iTunes or Stitcher. You can also go to patreon.com/Phil, and you can contribute there. Just helps offset a little bit the time and effort that I put into the show. Each show takes anywhere from 4 to 10 hours to put together and schedule interviews, do a little research, editing, all that stuff. It's mostly fun, but sometimes it gets to feel a little bit like work, and a little encouragement from you via a couple $1 donation feels real nice. So if you can go to patreon.com/Phil, I would greatly appreciate that. Or, of course, like I said, leave a show review. Coming up, I will be at the Women of Color Beyond Belief Conference. That is in early October, 4th through the 6th. And that's at the Marriott Midway Hotel in Chicago. So I'm going to be there for that. So if you have some time you can spare, going to be a great time, October 4th through the 6th in Chicago. All the time people tell me there's nothing going on in Chicago. Well, here it is. It's going on in Chicago. And, of course, just a few weeks after that, I think it's 2 weeks, 10 days. Yeah, a week and a half, I guess, after it ends. 2 weekends later is the CSI conference, Center for Inquiries conference in Las Vegas. It's at the Flamingo Hotel, Las Vegas. And, of course, in Las Vegas, we're going to have a special meeting thing. I don't know what to call it, but on the 17th of October at 4:15 in the Flamingo Casino, Las Vegas, right next to the check-in or registration for the Center of Inquiry Conference, we are going to meet. We're going to meet at 4:15, and at 4:30, we leave the Flamingo. And if you can't make the 4:30 departure time, come find us, catch up with us. We're going to go out of the Flamingo, and we're going to go south across Flamingo Road, I think it is. Yeah. And we're going to go over to the Grand Bazaar shops, which are right in front of Bali Casino, and we're going to go to Wahlburger. So we're going to do that. It might be me and one other person. It might just be me by myself. It might be 50 people. I don't know. I made a event on the Phil Ferguson Show page. So if you know you're going to go, you can go check there. So I have an idea. And like I said, we're just going to step out and go to Wahlburger. And then right after that, we're going to turn around, and right next door, right behind us, right next to it is the Fuel Bar, where they make fancy drinks by throwing bottles around. And sometimes they have buy one, get one free coupons. So we'll do that. And then we'll go back over to CSI Con just in time for the 7 p.m. opening reception. So we're planning on doing this right after the Thursday workshops and before the Thursday evening opening reception. Again, October 17th at 4:15 in the afternoon, right by the registration desk for SciCon. And then we're going to go over to the Grand Bazaar Shops, eat at Wahlburger, and drink at Fuel Bar. So hopefully you can join us for that. But that's basically what I've got for the show this week. Hopefully you enjoyed it. And if you go out to one of these conferences, please come up and say hello. And I hope to see you out there somewhere soon. Until then, ciao.
Well, I was born too late to play in the Rolling Stones. I don't know Jimmy Page, I never met Yoko Ono. Standing with a strap, I'm rock and roll's bastard son. Go out, get drunk, get laid, have fun. Don't got $1 million, don't drive a Cadillac. Give me half a chance, cause I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. I've been machine gun, handgun, hijack, left for dead. Dive bomb, napalm, nuclear warheaded. Dropped from a jet plane with no parachute. Shot by a firing squad and raped by a business suit. Dancing on a landmine, one leg left. I can still crawl and I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. Well, you're bigger, rougher, meaner, tougher, dirtier and uglier and sneakier and trickier. You wanna shoot me with a gun, cut me with a knife. Take your bare hands and rip out my eyes. Kick me in the balls and you bit me in the neck. Well, hit me again, cause I'm not dead yet. Not dead yet. Not dead yet. I'm a mad dog fighting with the wall against my back. You better get a bigger gun, I'm not dead yet. Well, there's a mugger in the alley, there's a sniper in the hall. There's a girl at the bar, wants to get